Welcome to the J.John and Tom Wright podcast. Hello, Tom.
Hello, John. Nice to be here with you.
Thank you, Tom. Some years ago, Tom, I received a letter from quite a renowned Bible teacher. It was 10 pages long, handwritten, to say, J.John, you're not preaching the gospel. And this particular Bible teacher felt that you cannot be a Christian unless you're baptized in water. So a little dialogue began. I wonder whether we could have that sort of dialogue about what he raised with me. Obviously, let's begin with the word Christian or born again. Okay, what does that
nice
mean?
Little concepts just like that. But let me first probe. Presumably by baptism, he then meant what we call adult baptism.
Yes.
So he was discounting anyone who'd been baptized as an infant.
Yes.
He didn't regard that as baptism.
No.
I mean, that's the real problem.
Yes.
That from very early on, the church baptized the children of Christian families. And it was only much, much, much later, after the Reformation, when some groups, observing the kind of nominal Christianity that was rife in Europe in the 16th century, said, no, we're getting this wrong. We've imagined that by splashing water over children, you make them automatically Christians, and we're now going to wait and see when people actually come to faith, then they get baptized. So we discount that other experience, whatever it was, as a misleading thing. And I want to say, I understand the problem. I remember being here in Oxford, 30 years ago, when Cardinal Suenens, one of the leading Roman Catholic charismatic cardinals in the 1970s and 80s, he began a mission address here in Oxford by saying, the world is full of baptized non-Christians. And I remember thinking, we're actually getting somewhere when a Roman Catholic cardinal stands up in the Sheldonian Theatre in Oxford and says that. And actually the same day, I had been in an evangelical church in Oxford where I'd heard the rector quoting Martin Luther, and Martin Luther, when faced with diabolical temptations and attacks, etc., had replied with the Latin phrase, baptizatus sum, I have been baptized. Luther, of course, had been baptized as an infant, but that was the ground that Luther said he would stand on. I have been crucified with Christ. I had been raised with him from the dead. So you, Satan, you attacks, whatever it is, you can't touch me. And I remember reflecting with delight. Here we have an evangelical saying, I have been baptized, that's the ground, as a child, that's the ground on which I stand. And here we have a Roman Catholic saying the world is full of baptized non-Christians. Now can we have the conversation? And I'm not sure that that's really happened. And I think part of the problem has been that we've put things the wrong way round, as though baptism is something that somehow I do, whereas baptism, of course, goes back through the baptism of Jesus by John, which points back to two things in the Old Testament, to creation emerging from the primal waters, and then to the people of Israel emerging from the Red Sea. And both of those are picked up in the New Testament imagery of baptism. And so both of those are images about what the extraordinary thing that God does before anyone is even there to witness it in creation, and before the Israelites know what on earth is going on when they're being released through the Red Sea. And so the whole point about baptism, it's God doing something which creates a new context within which then the people to whom this has happened are called to follow him. Now, as we know from the story of the wilderness wanderings, a lot of the Israelites, even though they'd come through the waters of the Red Sea, they said they didn't want to know. They didn't believe him. They wanted to go off their own way. They wanted to worship Moabite gods, whatever. And Paul picks exactly that up in 1 Corinthians 10, when he says, our fathers were all baptized into Moses. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, but many of them, God was not pleased with them. And the answer is, God does this great, extraordinary act of liberation and new creation. But God does that not in order to create a race of puppets, as though now you just can't help yourself, you're a Christian whether you like it or not, but in order to create new humans. And the point about being human includes having the responsibility to grow in understanding and faith and so on. And it seems to me that I've wrestled with this over the years because, of course, I've known many, many people in many churches who were baptized as children. I still want to use that word, and the person you quoted wouldn't have done, but I do, and for whom it really doesn't seem to have had any effect at all, and who've wandered away from it. And yet, I want to say, they are given that as the basis, that it is true what the baptism says, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life for you as well. Now, you are somebody who has now had that sign given to you. Now what you're going to do with it. And that, it seems to me, is the right way to see it as God's gift, which then puts us in the position of responding to God, rather than me pinning my flag on God's map by saying, I'm going to turn up and do this thing called baptism. So I really want to say we're in danger of putting the cart before the horse. And actually, it seems to me the history of the so-called Baptist movements does rather indicate that they meet the same problem that Peter Baptist churches meet, that a lot of people in Baptist churches get baptized in water at the age of 12, 13, 14, 15, a youth group in a Baptist church, often they will all be going forward for baptism. And then, as many Baptists will admit, by the time those people are 20 or 25, they will have the same problem of drop-off as we in the established churches or the mainstream churches have. So I'm not sure that the Baptist movement actually solves the problem which it was claiming to solve. Now, this isn't, of course, a complete answer. I can't, in a few sentences, say the whole thing. But I would be quite robust in responding to this and saying, actually, no, from the beginning, the church saw itself as a family, people joining the family. And Paul talks about the children of believers in 1 Corinthians, etc. And they're given the sign of God's grace in Jesus Christ, and they're told now, what are you going to do about this?
Now, I would say, Tom, that in many of the audiences that I'm addressing, many have not grown up in the church, were not baptized as babies. And where it says in John, those who believed and received him became children of God. Mm-hmm. And so I would preach the gospel as best as I can, explaining this and giving people an opportunity to receive Christ. Now, the person who wrote to me was saying, no, that's not enough. They have to be baptized for them to become real Christians. Okay, so where does baptism fit in the whole conversion story?
At the time of the Reformation, there were debates about this in relation to the brigand who died on the cross beside Jesus.
Yes.
And Jesus assures him, today you will be with me in paradise. And people said, well, he wasn't baptized. And so they made a kind of legal fiction. Well, he was baptized in his blood or something.
Yes.
Which was a way of saying baptism is normal, but of course, God can easily cope with the abnormal or the non-normal. Yes. So don't get in a fuss about that. But if somebody has genuinely come to faith and they have not been baptized, I would say, yes, they need to come to baptism. And different churches have different disciplines about that, as they did in the early church, where you would go through a period as the catechumenate, where you would be trained, you would come to regular classes, you would study the scriptures, you would learn methods of prayer, etc. And then, possibly at Easter, which is one of the most appropriate times for it, they would baptize all the people who had thus been prepared. Now, we see it in the New Testament that it can happen much more quickly than that. When Philip meets the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8, he's expounding Isaiah 53 to him, and the Ethiopian eunuch believes, and then the chariot is going along, and he says, there's a pool of water here. What's to stop me being baptized? And Philip says, you believe in Jesus? splash.
I know, and I like that.
Yeah, of course.
Because I think
Absolutely.
sometimes we lose the spontaneity.
I agree. And I have sometimes baptized people within a day or so of them coming to faith, where it's clear they really have received Jesus into their lives. And I say, okay, why not at the evening service tomorrow? Will come. But I would want to say as well, bring not only friends but also family, because this is not, we are none of us just isolated little individuals. It's rather like getting married. When Mr. X marries Miss Y, they bring a whole tribe of people with them, whether or not they're physically present.
It's a public declaration, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think the act of baptism. Part of our trouble is that we've so Platonized our Christianity that we think, baptism, that's a sort of a physical action. How can that possibly do any good? And the answer is the whole gospel is about God becoming human, becoming flesh and blood. And Jesus himself uses the image of baptism to talk about his own death. He says, I have a baptism to be baptized with.
Yes.
Now, he'd been baptized by John in the River Jordan, but he sees his coming death as the kind of fulfillment of that. And Paul picks that up in Romans 6 when he talks about being baptized into his death and thereby also being raised. And in Colossians 2 and 3, he says the same thing. You've died with the Messiah. You are raised with him already. So it's a way of saying this by prayer and grace is now true of you, and you must now make it real in your own life. And so that is the order of grace. It's the order of saying God takes the initiative. It is always possible for us to rebel, but look at what was said in 1 Corinthians. And I think 1 Corinthians 10 is writing to a situation where after the verdict of Gallio's court in Acts 18, which said Christianity is now legal here, we're not going to persecute you. It's now an okay thing. The result was Christianity became the new fashion in Corinth. All sorts of people flooded into the church. Hey, guys, it's a new experience. Why didn't you come on the Sunday, which they call the Lord's Day, and we'll have this meal and we'll sing some this. And so all sorts of people came into church without really very much understanding of what it was all about at all. And so Paul has to say, sorry, this is what baptism means. It doesn't mean a free-for-all, ethically or whatever. It means you're committed to following the crucified and risen Jesus. So I want to say, if contemporary churches think they have a problem about all these people who come in without realizing what it's all about, that problem goes right back to about AD 50 in Corinth, if not sooner.
So people who are listening to our conversation now, Tom, they love Jesus, they've received Christ, they're following Jesus, but they've not been baptized.
Then I would say they need to belong to a Christian fellowship in which they will be baptized. And different fellowships have different rules about how you prepare for that and how you check that this is real.
But we agree, Tom, that baptism is biblical and essential.
Of course. Normally essential. And that word normally is to cover the cases like the dying brigand on the cross beside Jesus. That normally this is the way. If somebody is involved in a horrible car accident and is dying in a ditch, and somebody comes along and says, believe in Jesus, and the person says, I believe, and dies, then they can't be baptized. Although there's that case in 1 Corinthians 15 where Paul talks about people being baptized on behalf of the dead, people who had believed but hadn't had a chance to be baptized yet. We're not quite sure what was going on there, but that was a way of saying baptism really does matter.
Yeah.
So yes, if somebody has believed, is enjoying getting to know Jesus and following him, then yes, baptism is part of the normal kit. And I want to say, and I've not really had much experience of this myself, but people who've worked in deliverance ministry, in the ministry in and for and with people who have had real serious spiritual warfare in their heart for whatever reason, they have come back from that and said that when people have been baptized, whether or not it meant anything to them at the time, they are less likely to be attacked in that satanic
Yes.
way
Yes.
than people who haven't been. There is something about claiming the death and resurrection of Jesus, whether it's over a tiny baby or a 5-year-old or a teenager
Yeah.
or an adult, which says Jesus is now part of your life, whether or not you realize what's going on.
Yeah.
Please God, hopefully you will realize, but that gives you a new identity. So baptism is part of the Christian's identity badge. It's very clear.
It is very clear. Now, what about those who were baptized as babies, but they were never brought up as believers, that not in a Christian home? Later on in life, they receive Christ and they want to have a full immersion baptism.
Yeah. I understand such things. In my own family, I have met this argument several times, and many people I know who've gone this route. I want to say, one baptism once, that baptism is now fulfilled. Who knows, when you were baptized, there was at least a vicar or somebody who was doing it, who was praying for you. There may well have been a praying granny in the background, or an aunt, or somebody who would just be holding you in love, in prayer. And so don't regard that baptism, even if you have no memory of it and I'm not quite sure what was going on, don't regard that as invalid. So I want to say there are all sorts of wonderful ways in which you can celebrate your newfound faith without having to repeat something that really shouldn't be repeated.
Yes.
It's rather like a couple who've been through difficulties and so on and say, we want to get married again. And the answer is no, you were married. That's a one-off. And if you're still married, then you don't need to get married again. You need maybe to renew your vows, to do things, to say prayers, to commit to one another in fresh ways. And sometimes couples do that. It's very moving. But you can't actually go back and get remarried. Here's the marriage certificate. This is who you were right from day one. So I want to say baptism is designed to be a one-off initiatory thing. The opposite, if you like, of Holy Communion, which is designed to be regular. Frequent.
Yes. But if they chose to have an adult baptism, Jesus doesn't look down and go, "Oh, I'm a bit upset with you."
I have no idea what Jesus thinks about that. I want to say that I think it makes a bit of a nonsense of various things, and among other things, it says to the people who did that early baptism, I don't want to know. You may have been saying prayers for me, but I'm not buying it. And I think that's pretty brutal, actually.
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, pastorally, the important thing is we now have people who have been baptized, who are believers. That's what matters.
It's matters.
Like what I said before about the chicken and the egg. The chicken and the egg, which came first? Well, we're both here now, so whatever.
And we're in an agreement, Tom, that if you haven't been baptized, then it is essential that you are baptized.
Yeah, it is the essential of normal Christian living, that because when you go into the church and share in worship, you ought to know that you are linking arms with other people of whom it has been said, you died with the Messiah, you've been raised with the Messiah, now you are part of the family which is characterized by Jesus' cross and resurrection. That's what baptism is saying.
Yeah. A friend of mine who I've been helping, he's a recent convert, believer, and I've been helping him. He said to me the other day, Tom, how do I know that I'm saved? And he was worried that he wasn't. But actually, it's a fair question, isn't it? How do we know that we're children of God?
Yeah. It's a question which different people ask for different reasons.
Yes.
And actually, pastorally, I would say some people just have a natural anxiety about them, and they're probably anxious about whether they renewed their car license. They're probably anxious about whether their mother still loves them after all these years, or whatever. And so sometimes that anxiety just comes over as well. Actually, one of the main ways of saying you are who you are in Christ is for that person to go on reading the Gospels and go on meeting Jesus in the Gospels.
Yeah.
And the Gospel story takes us, among other places, to the Last Supper. And Jesus gave us the meal, which he instituted at the Last Supper, precisely to be a way of saying, here I am and I am for you. Take this and believe. It's designed to be a sign of assurance. And if somebody says, oh, but maybe I was just doing this out of habit and don't mean it. Well, you can go on torturing yourself like that if you want. But actually in the New Testament, the signs of life are faith, hope and love, the presence of the Spirit, the leading and guiding of the Spirit. And particularly as you read Scripture, as you come to the Lord's table, all the convergence of signs that say you are actually one of the family. Now, sometimes a little bit of healthy doubt isn't a bad thing, because otherwise we could just presume. We could think, oh, well, I'm all right. I've always gone to church, so I'm okay. And maybe we do all of us do need to probe from time to time. Am I really sure I'm on track? But those are the ways through: prayer, Scripture, sacrament.
Wonderful, Tom. Always a delight to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.